recorded, and it will be posted on both our YouTube page, that's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. And I'm typing that into the chat right now. It's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. We'll also put it on our website at chicago.gov/business education. So again, this webinar is being recorded. If you have any colleagues that aren't able to join or any additional follow-up questions. Additionally, a big portion of today's webinar I know will be for answering questions. So I ask that you please submit those questions via the chat function. That's the function that I just used to send you all those links. Again, use the chat if you have any questions. That's the easiest way for me to manage questions as they come in through the webinar. As you know, today's webinar is all about the state-imposed Tier 2 resurgence mitigations. So these COVID-19 regulations that I'm going to be reviewing today are set by the state. So it may be the case that I do not immediately know some of the answers to your questions, which is why you'll see on the bottom of every slide an email, BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. I'll type that into the chat as well if you just want to copy and paste it. That's BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. So any questions that I do not answer today, or maybe if you have any follow-up questions as we change, maybe changing down the road, please feel free to email those at BACP outreach to BACP outreach at cityofchicago.org. I do see a couple questions come in. I'm going to do my best to answer those questions as we go through this webinar, but I also have, the webinar will only take probably about a half an hour, so I do have a lot of time allotted for questions. So if I don't get to your question right away, I promise I will review it and answer it at the end of the webinar to the best of my ability. One additional quick point on questions, as I said, I'm here from the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection, that's BACP. I am not the health department. I'm not the department either from the state or the city that sets these rules. So therefore, I may not know all of the answers to some questions about where these regulations came from and why these regulations are in place. I do not know all those answers. I am not the health expert, and I do not pretend to be the health expert. So I apologize in advance if I can't answer some of those specific questions you do have. If you want some clarity on some of the health background for some of these regulations, please feel free to send us an email to that BACP outreach email that I mentioned before, and that's in the bottom of every slide. And I'll pass it along to the health department, either at the state or the city, in order to help get your answers. So the agenda for today, again, this webinar is all about navigating the state-imposed Tier 2 resurgence mitigations. I'm going to start. I know there's a lot of confusion out there, a lot of different tiers and phases set by the state. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the state mitigation plan. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the metrics that the state is using to change regulations and where we are right now within those metrics. Then I'm going to spend the majority of today's webinar providing details on the Tier 2 mitigations, the ones that are in effect in Chicago right now. And then I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Tier 1 mitigations, which are what we hope to get to soon. So first, the state-imposed mitigation measures. As you know, in Chicago over the last month or so, and really throughout the state of Illinois and throughout the Midwest, COVID-19 we've been making a lot of progress in the fight against COVID-19. Obviously, we hit the second surge back in the fall, starting around the beginning of October, but we've really been coming down from that peak with a couple bumps here and there due to the holidays, but been coming down from that peak relatively consistently over the last month or so. And as the conditions continue to improve, the Illinois Department of Public Health is reclassifying regions into Tier 2, Tier 1, and then back to Phase 4 as they meet the necessary metrics. So back when COVID-19, when we hit the second surge, we were in Phase 4. In response to this second surge, the state started by implementing Tier 1 mitigations, then Tier 2 mitigations, and finally Tier 3 mitigations, getting stricter and stricter as we moved along. Now that things are improving, we're able to slowly move back and slowly loosen restrictions. Chicago is a standalone region under the state. Chicago is Region 11. Right now, Chicago is in Tier 2 mitigations. As of this past Monday, I believe, we moved to Tier 2 mitigations. So that means we moved down from Tier 3, the strictest, to Tier 2, slightly loosened restrictions. And if we continue to make progress, we can then advance to Tier 1. And if we make more progress, we can remove all those mitigations and operate in Phase 4 like we were back in September and October. I put the website here. This is the Illinois Department of Public Health, the Illinois Department of Public Health website. That's dph.illinois.gov/region metrics. When you get to that website, you can follow all the metrics, all the mitigation measures. You can make sure to click on Region 11. Region 11 is Chicago. I'm going to pause real quick for a question that just came in related to this. Even in Tier 2, do we still have a stay-at-home advisory? It's a great question. Right now, as of today, there is a stay-at-home advisory in effect. However, that is going to not be in effect as of tomorrow. So the stay-at-home advisory will expire and it will not be renewed as of tomorrow. For folks that don't know, that stay-at-home advisory is just an advisory. It is not a formal regulation, but is an advisory from the city strongly urging people to stay home as much as they can. And a really important follow-up to that question and to this point is, just because our metrics are improving and we're able to loosen restrictions and get rid of the stay-at-home advisory as of tomorrow, it does not mean that we're out of the woods. By no means are we out of the woods. We still have many, many people getting sick and dying from COVID every single day. So really, it's time, while we are loosening restrictions, it's time right now to double down on following those regulations that are in place. So we're loosening restrictions for businesses, but it's really more important than ever that businesses are following those regulations and that individuals are making the right personal choices to minimize spread, wearing face coverings, avoiding large gatherings. Even as we're loosening restrictions, large gatherings are still prohibited. So even as we're moving, just keep that in mind. So again, the metrics effective as of January 18th, the Chicago region, Region 11, we met the state-imposed criteria to move to Tier 2. We were able to move to Tier 2 because we met 3 different metrics. First, test positivity rate. This is the number you see most often used. It's the number that I follow closest. Test positivity rate below 12% for 3 consecutive days, measured by the 7-day rolling average. And we made even more progress since this weekend. We're currently at 7.8%. Second metric, greater than 20% available staffed ICU hospital beds for 3 consecutive days. Currently, we're significantly above that at 28%. And no sustained increase in the number of people in the hospital with COVID for 7 out of 10 days. Currently, we're at 741 people in the hospital in Chicago with COVID. And we've been seeing that number steadily decrease really over the last few weeks. So that's important. It's not the raw number there. It's important to see that number decreasing, and it has been doing so pretty consistently. So why were we able to make this change and move to Tier 2? We were able to move to Tier 2 because the state removed one of the metrics that they were using in order to set the mitigation measures. Up until January 18th, there was a metric, and I apologize, that should have been Monday, January 18th. They removed the requirement to have more than 20% available staffed medical or surgical hospital beds. This is something that we've been pushing the state for a while to remove because Chicago was consistently under 20% there. But we believe, and again, I'm not the health expert, so I apologize if I get anything wrong here, but we believe that that metric did not accurately show what was going on in Chicago, and that these 3 metrics are better metrics to be using to evaluate our our ability to move between mitigation measures. So we're very, very pleased that the state removed this metric. And because of that, we were able to move to Tier 2 and hopefully move to Tier 1 shortly. And I will talk about that in just a little bit. I had a question about the Illinois stay-at-home advisory. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on the Illinois stay-at-home advisory. I will, if you send us an email to BACP Outreach, I will get you a response there. But I will say, you know, even as these advisories are expiring, I just want to very, very much remind people that we still need to be taking this seriously. We still need to be wearing face coverings, keeping 6 feet of social distancing. I'll probably say that 10 different times over the course of this webinar. So real quick, I'm going to provide an overview of the Tier 2 mitigations before getting into industry by industry specifics. First, performance venues, museums, movie theaters, and indoor recreation establishments can now be open at limited capacity, and I'll go over that in just 1 second. Events can resume at 10 people maximum. So events were previously prohibited, they can now resume. I'll get into that in more detail in just a second as well. Fitness classes had been prohibited. They can now resume also at 10 people total. Personal services such as facials, beard shaves, things like that, that require the removal of face coverings can now resume. Again, those were prohibited. They can now, as of this past Monday, they can now resume. Note, however, indoor dining is still prohibited. However, indoor dining at very limited capacity will be allowed in Tier 1 when we get to Tier 1. So I'm going to provide a detailed overview now on a bunch of different industries, and then I'm going to go into a couple of these in a little bit more detail. I see a couple specific questions come in. I do promise that I will answer those questions when either they'll be answered or we'll get them soon. First, commercial and residential buildings and hotels. Now you'll see on this right column, Tier 2 capacity. They're now at 40% capacity or 50 people per space. So that's per common area, checkout areas, and hotels. Hotels still have a guest-only policy, so nobody other than guests should be in hotels. Indoor recreation, such as bowling, arcade, things like that, can now resume at 25% capacity or 25 people per space indoors. So, bowling alley, for example, can reopen 25%, 25 people per space. Groups limited to no more than 10. Museums can reopen. I know, I'm sure folks saw the Field Museum will be reopening at 25% capacity. Museum guided tours limited to no more than 50, provided still, proper spacing between those. Personal services can now operate at 40% capacity, up from the previous limit of 25%. And as I said, services that require the removal of face coverings are allowed with proper safety precautions. Retail stores, non-essential retail stores, can now operate at 40% capacity, up from 25%. Performance venues and movie theaters were closed indoors. They can now open at 40% capacity or 50 with a max of 50 people per space. Events previously were not allowed. They can now open at capped at 10. See a couple questions come in on events, so I'm going to take a quick minute to talk about events, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail when I get into bars and restaurants. So right now, indoor events are capped at no more than 10 people. Things like weddings, banquets, things like that can operate at no more than 10 people. Now, those events can have food and drink at them. So we can have indoor events with food or drink. However, and I'll hop to the next slide for this to talk about it as well. Bars and restaurants cannot simply have an event that has food within their regular bar or restaurant space. Again, I'll repeat that, kind of stumbled through the words. Bars and restaurants cannot have events, now that events are allowed, within their main bar and restaurant space. If a bar or restaurant has an event space that is always used for events, that before COVID was always and primarily used for events, for example, a banquet hall, an event room within your bar or restaurant, that can operate an event with no more than 10 people. Again, only if it is a space that is always designated and always used and designed for events. So if you have an event space within your bar or restaurant, that can operate at no more than 10 people, but you cannot simply turn your regular bar or restaurant space into an event space. That would be not allowed, and we have clarified that specifically with the state. A couple more words on events. Events can have events. Again, you can have food at events, but you need to be following you need to be following food dining. You can be serving alcohol in there, but again, no more than 10 people. You can have outdoor events. Outdoor events are still allowed, also limited to no more than 10 people, however. So again, outdoor events are okay, no more than 10 people. So what are a little bit more detail about bars and restaurants? As a reminder, bars and restaurants are still closed for indoor service. You cannot, no indoor dining, no indoor drinking, no indoor service for bars and restaurants. The only even minor exception is if your bar or restaurant has a private event space that you always use for private events, then it's limited to no more than 10. So outdoor service is permitted. You can have no more than 6 people on your outdoor table. So I see a couple of questions. I thought the max per table was 4. The max per table will be 4 people when we get to indoor dining, which we are not at yet. So outdoor is still limited to no more than 6 people. Outdoor for bars and restaurants, no more than 6 people per table. Indoor at this point is not allowed. I'm going to go into bars and restaurants in a little bit more detail on, I believe, just the next slide. Childcare and out-of-school programs have no change as we move to Tier 2. I'm going to talk quickly about health and fitness. Health and fitness are still limited to 25% indoor capacity. However, the big change for health and fitness centers is that indoor group classes can now resume at 25% or 10 people per space. So again, indoor group classes were prohibited under Tier 3. They can now operate at 25% or 10 people per space. Also, additional loosening of restrictions, reservations are no longer required at health and fitness centers, and locker rooms can reopen under those 25% capacity restrictions. Again, I'm going to go on to some of these, see a lot of questions come in related to this. So I'm going to talk about bars and restaurants now in even more detail. I see a couple questions come in related to this. So on each of the next few slides, the changes in Tier 2, you will find highlighted, you will find in red font. So the changes are in red font. Indoor service, again, remains prohibited. Outdoor service is still allowed, and let's use this time as a bit of a PSA on what outdoor service means. Sidewalk cafes, outdoor patios, expanded outdoor dining areas. We have extended sidewalk cafes. Anyone who has a current sidewalk cafe can operate until June 1st of this year without renewing their sidewalk cafe. So you can operate through the winter months. You don't need to worry about getting a new one until June 1st. Any sidewalk cafes can continue to operate. Rooftops, places that are directly underneath retractable roofs. We've gotten a couple questions about retractable roofs. If you have a space, that has a retractable roof, but that retractable roof only opens for a small portion of your dining area, you cannot say that that entire dining area cannot be open. That entire dining area is not considered outdoors. Only spaces that are directly below that retractable roof. You can't have, a table that's 20 feet away from the retractable roof and call that outdoors. Outdoor tents are allowed only if they are at least 50% open. So fully enclosed tents are not allowed because that is considered indoors. Igloos and other one-party enclosures are allowed, provided again that there's just one party within those spaces. And finally, and this is an important point, and I'm sure many of you know, indoor spaces where 50% of a wall can be removed by opening a window, door, or panel with tables that are within 8 feet of those openings. That is considered outdoor, and that can still continue. Indoor events, again, this is the new thing, with no more than 10 people can now operate only in locations that are designed and primarily used for events. Indoor events, again, you cannot turn your regular bar and restaurant space into an event space. It has to be a space that's always used for events. I had a question, 6 people, are the rules, how many people can sit at a table for an indoor event? My understanding is that you can have 6 people per table at indoor events. At this point, we'll let you know if that changes. Face coverings must be worn in indoor and outdoor public settings, except when seated and actively eating or drinking. Again, no more than 6 people per table for outdoor service, and patrons must be seated while eating or drinking. This is a major violation that we often find. If we show up at a place, even if everybody is outdoors and everybody's walking around mingling while eating and drinking, that is not okay. Right. I'm going to take a couple questions now specifically related to bars and restaurants before moving on to some of the other industries. So again, I had a question about exterior social gatherings. At this point, all events, whether indoors or outdoors, are limited to no more than 10 people. Yes, you can serve alcohol at an event space. At this point, events need to have food with them as well. So you can serve alcohol, but you need food there as well. I had a question, have there been discussions about events being based on square footage? Unfortunately, these rules are being set by the state, not Chicago. So I can't tell you if there's been discussions about events being based on square footage. That's beyond anything that we know in Chicago at this point. So great. Another question about the city's stay-at-home advisory. Has it changed recently? I thought it originally would expire on January 30th. Yes, it did change recently, and the recent change was that it now expires tomorrow. So the stay-at-home advisory will be expiring tomorrow. A couple questions I've seen come in. Great question, actually, that just came in, and I should have had a slide on this to clarify. Questions about license renewal. Yes, the city has extended license renewal. I believe the city has extended it all the way until July 15th of 2021. So anybody who has a license that expires that expired since March 15th of 2020 will be considered active, and you won't need to renew it until July 15th of 2021. We don't want folks to have to worry about renewing their license during this time. So anybody who had a license that would have expired, those licenses are considered active. I see a couple questions come in about what, and yes, that includes your liquor license. I can't speak specifically. I know that the state has renewed has some specific extensions of their state liquor license. I'm not an expert on that, but if you send us an email to the BACP outreach, I can provide you more information on the state's extension as well. But for the city, the license renewal extension applies to all business and public vehicle licenses, including retail food and including liquor licenses. See a couple of questions come in about when indoor dining can resume, when other things can resume. I'm going to talk about what's coming next in just a couple slides. Personal services, I want to provide a little bit more detail here. Services can be provided at 40% indoor capacity now, with total capacity limited to no more than 50 people. All areas need to have 6 feet of social distancing with impermeable barriers in place where social distancing is not possible. Face coverings must be worn by employees and customers. The only exception to that is that face coverings can be removed by customers only for services that require their removal, facials, beard shaves, things like that. And we strongly encourage reservations and contactless payment. Health and fitness centers, and I saw a couple questions come in related to this. Indoor activity at a health and fitness center can be provided at 25% capacity. Indoor group classes can resume with no more than 10 people. At this point, outdoor fitness classes are also still limited to 10 participants. Face coverings should be worn by all customers and employees indoors. 6 feet of social distancing should be maintained between individuals and equipment. Locker rooms can reopen with strict social distancing and capacity restrictions. However, saunas, steam rooms, hot tubs, things like that should be remaining closed. And reservations are no longer required at health and fitness centers. I had a question come in, 25% capacity for a fitness studio space allows, if a 25% capacity for a gym group fitness studio space allows for more than 10 participants with social distancing, can we have more than 10 per class? No. At this point, the limit, no matter how big a space is for a class, is 10 people. When we get to tier 1, that'll expand to 15. But at this point, the limit is no more than 10 people in a class, no matter how big your space is. Right. Question about swimming pools. I believe swimming pools can reopen if I'm I provided that they're big enough to allow for social distancing within them. Saunas, steam rooms, and hot tubs need to be closed, but swimming pools can be open. Real quick on retail, not too much has changed on retail, so I won't go into all that much detail here. Retail can now operate at 40% capacity for every place except for grocery stores and pharmacies. So grocery stores and pharmacies can operate at 50%, everyone else at 40%. Quick reminder, face coverings must be worn at all times. 6 feet markers should be set up in areas where employees or guests queue or congregate. Hand sanitizer should be available upon entrance. Cafeterias, buffets, things like that can be open only if an employee is serving the food and wearing PPE. You can have self-service beverage fountains if the surfaces are cleaned and sanitized frequently. Great. I saw a couple other questions, so I'm going to move back to these first slides to provide an overview before I get into what tier 1 should be looking like. Question about and let me just find some of the other questions. Question, how do you define what a space is for indoor recreation? That's a great question. If places, it really is, it's 25%, no more than 25 per space for indoor recreation. The important thing is that spaces there's actually some sort of divider between spaces. It's not saying, hey, this corner of the room is at 25, this other corner of the room is at 25. They need to be truly different rooms, different spaces with some sort of divider between them. Feel free, if you have a specific question on your specific establishment, feel free to email that to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. The max group size or percent capacity for outdoor recreation, at this point, it is still 25% for outdoor spaces and with no more than 100 people per space. Great. I wanted to provide a little bit of detail on what tier 1 will look like here in the city of Chicago. We are very quickly approaching the metrics for meeting tier 1. For us to move to tier 1 as a city, we need to have a test positivity rate between 6.5% and 8% for 3 consecutive days. Currently, today is the first day that we are under 8.0%. So our understanding of the state mitigations is that today is that first day. And once we hit 3 consecutive days, we can move to Tier 1 mitigations, which means potentially as soon as this weekend, we can move to Tier 1 mitigations because we're meeting the other 2 criteria. They're the same criteria there that we needed to move to Tier 2, having greater than 20% available ICU beds and having a no sustained increase in the number of people in the hospital. So we are very, very hopeful that we will be moving to Tier 1, potentially even as soon as this weekend. And if and when that happens, we will be sending out updated communications to everybody. I'll be holding additional webinars, hopefully as soon as this weekend or early next week. And we will be making as much of this information public as possible. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on Tier 1 because we're not here yet. However, this is a general overview of what Tier 1 looks like. First and most, I think importantly for many folks, indoor dining can resume at 25% capacity or with a max of 25 people per space or room with no more than 4 people per table. Again, Tier 1, indoor dining can resume at 25% capacity or 25 people with no more than 4 people per table. One very important point on this, we're still kind of clarifying some of the details with the state, but our understanding of this is that this will allow for indoor dining, so a restaurant with a food license or a bar with a food license can open indoors. Additionally, a bar that or a tavern or a brewery that does not have a food license will be able to partner with a food establishment or even with a third-party delivery company so that food is always available and they can reopen for indoor dining once we hit Tier 1. Again, so bars or taverns that do not have a food license will be able to partner with a food establishment so that food is always available at their place, if potentially an establishment next door, to allow taverns, breweries, places like that to reopen once we get to Tier 1 at 25% capacity or 25 people with 4 people per table. Again, this is just a very brief overview for now. We'll provide much more information on this once we get to Tier 1, which we hope to be again as soon as this weekend. And we'll provide detailed webinars specifically for bars and restaurants because we know that's going to be one of the major changes when we get to Tier 1. Events can resume at 50 people maximum. Again, this is will be a new change, the same specific rules for where events are allowed. You can't just turn your bar space into an event space, and fitness classes can resume at 15 people max. There's a number of other capacity changes as well that I'm not going to go into detail here, and I'll share once we get specifically to that level. But I will answer a couple questions related to Tier 1 at this point. One important question, people eating or drinking in bars and restaurants once we get to Tier 1 will absolutely still always need to be seated. Whether you're at a bar or a restaurant or a brewery, whether you're eating or drinking or both, always need to be seated. That will not change. Frankly, that's not going to change really anytime soon. We're nowhere near where we're going to allow people up and mingling because it's so much harder to maintain social distancing with that. Great question. When we hit Tier 1, will outside tables remain 6 per table? Yes. We're loosening restrictions. We're not adding restrictions. So outside tables will still be able to have 6 per table. Indoor tables will be limited to 4 per table. Great question. What industry are hookah lounges considered? While they're not a specific industry under here, we've been treating hookah in the same way that we've been treating bars, taverns, restaurants, places like that, because the activity is very similar. You're taking off a mask, and you're within close proximity. So once indoor dining can resume at 25% capacity or 25 people, 4 per table, hookah can also resume under those same restrictions. Question, if your capacity is 600, can I have 150 seats if I allow for distancing once we get to Tier 1? No, you are limited. You will be limited to 25 people. So it's 25% capacity or 25 people, whichever is less within a space. You cannot have over 25 people, even if you have a much larger space, unfortunately, at this point. So we're going to be going to some sort of indoor capacity, but it will be limited. I had a question, is the Tier 1, is the food partner option for taverns published anywhere by IDPH or DCEO? I have not seen that officially published. We'll be checking and getting more clarification from them. But that is, we have received that clarification that it will be okay if we allow it here. So that is something that we will be allowing. Great question. For 50-person events, can people stand? Anytime eating or drinking is allowed, people must be seated while eating and drinking. Again, anytime that eating or drinking is happening, whether in Tier 2 or Tier 1, people must be seated. So yes, you can have an event with 50 people maximum once we hit Tier 1. However, you cannot have people standing up while eating or drinking. That's always the case. Somebody has 3 rooms. Can you have 25% capacity within each room? Yes, you can have 25% capacity or 25 people within each room. That's 25 people within each room. Again, this is once we get to Tier 1. There is no indoor dining at this point. Again, this is a general overview of Tier 1. We will be providing this more formally if and when we hopefully get to Tier 1 very soon. I'm going to provide, finally, before I just open up for a couple more questions, a quick overview of all these metrics. I know I've talked about it a couple times, but I call on everyone really to go to the Illinois Department of Public Health's website. That's dph.illinois.gov/region metrics. Test positivity. For us to get to Tier 1, we need to be under 8% for 3 consecutive days. We've now been under 8% for 1 consecutive day. That's today. And that's that yellow dotted line there. Excuse me, to get to phase 4, we need to be under 6.5% for 3 consecutive days. We're not there yet, but we'll be hopefully trending in that correct direction. Next, ICU beds. Our goal is always to stay above that 20% threshold. As you can see, we're pretty consistently above that threshold, and we hope that that will remain the case. Finally, hospitalizations, which is really great news. These have been going down pretty consistently for the last few weeks, and we hope that that remains the case. I saw a couple questions about what the specific metrics are for us to add additional restrictions to move from Tier 2 to Tier 3, or once we get to Tier 1 to move back to Tier 2. I ask that you please, I don't have those metrics specifically in front of me, so I don't want to misspeak. Feel free to send us an email, bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org, and I will provide you those answers. You can also find those specifically on that Department of Public Health website, dph.illinois.gov/region metrics. There is specific criteria for moving back up a tier for adding additional restrictions. Again, I don't have those specifically in front of me, but happy to provide those. So a specific question come in related to, and I'll put it on the question slide, a specific question related to into dining halls at higher education facilities. If you can, I don't want to misspeak. I don't have those specific numbers in front of me. So please send us an email and we'll get you some clarification there as soon as possible. Is the medical provider approval still required for massage therapy sessions? That is not still required at this point. I see a couple questions come in related to office space. I'm happy to provide those numbers via email. Those look like some specific questions come through. Happy to, if you can maybe send those questions via email as well, I'm happy to get you the answers. Great question. Does the city anticipate different restrictions in Tier 1 or Phase 4 than the state as we move forward? At this point, the city and the health department are still looking at that. We are excited to move to some limited indoor dining when we get to Tier 1. But at this point, we're still looking at the specifics of what Phase 4 might look like to see how our restrictions will align or not align with the state. So we don't have any specific answers at this point, but I'll make sure to share them as soon as we do. Great, I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes. If anyone has any questions, again, I apologize if I directing you to our email for some of the questions I may not know the answers to immediately. I had a question, are there specific changes for personal care services in Tier 1? I don't believe so, but please feel free to send us an email and I will get you more information on that. Great. Again, as we wrap up, I just really do want to remind everybody, yes, we've been making progress over the last month or so, but we don't want to see, as we are easing these restrictions, we do not want to see all of this progress crumble. It's really important that it's really important that we continue to make progress here. And that the best way to do that is by following these regulations and making those own personal choices, wearing face coverings, maintain social distancing, avoiding large gatherings, things like that. Right. I'm going to see a couple additional questions come through. Just to clarify, hookah lounges can still not open. They will not be able to be open until Tier 1. Quick reminder on movie theaters. Movie theaters can reopen now under Tier 2, which is where we're at right now. They can reopen at 40% capacity, no more than 50 people per space. I had a question, managing a 50-person event and asking everyone to be seated is extremely difficult. I think we certainly understand that, but at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of the establishment. And if you can't have an event where people are seated and eating while they're eating and drinking, then you can't be having an event, because that's something that is very concerning if we find that. For live theaters, would backstage be considered a different space than the stage and the lobby different than the audience seats? Yes, every different space, every different room is limited to 40% capacity and no more than 50 people. Right. I want to point everybody, and I'll type it into the chat. You can find this information on the Illinois website where I sent everybody. Additionally, we are updating consistently our own reopening website for the city of Chicago. That's chicago.gov/reopening. Again, chicago.gov/reopening. Please, it'll be updated there as soon as we get confirmation from the state that we can move to Tier 1. Please look to additional webinars. If you all are not on our email list, please join our email list. Send us an email to BACP Outreach. We'll add you to our email list, and we will we send updates as soon as we change tiers. So please look for those. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for your commitment to following these regulations. We know it's extremely, extremely challenging, but we really thank you all for your ongoing dedication. And we will we look forward to a better future. I know it's tough, but as we're moving towards reopening and easing of restrictions, we are really truly hopeful that come this summer things can get back to some form of normal. So great. Again, we will be sending additional information via email, and don't hesitate to reach out to us via email as well. Thank you.